Welcome to Critical Moves of Telesur. Today, we're going to break the routine and once again on the table, the security topic. This is what the West powers have done, along with supporting companies have gathered in Munich this weekend. What were they talking about? Who are the new threats in the world, according to the Western perspective of the events? This is what we're going to be analyzing. Let's begin now. Let's listen to statements on behalf of those who went to this conference about security. Our closest alliance, the United States, under the current government, rejects the idea of having an international community, as if you thought of yourself first was a global policy, as if it's correct to think in this way, to think of yourself first. We are witnessing a destructive policy year after year. We are going away from having an international cooperation to create a more Pacific world. The idea of having competition marks today the new reality in the world.
Bestimmt im Augenblick nicht nur die Strategiepapiere unserer Tage. Quand je regarde le monde tel qu'il est en train de se faire, et c'est le thème de votre conférence cette année.
There's a weakening of the West. 20 years ago, we thought that our ideas were global, that we were going to dominate the world. Maybe we did it in military and technological phases, but in 20 years, we're going to be pushed to other agendas, other principles. Those are rising now.
Par d'autres projets et d'autres valeurs, elles émergent. Aujourd'hui, dans nos pays,
now, in our countries, people doubt of Europe, even of the idea of democracy. The extremists are increasing. And what's at play is our capacity to give answers to the question, what is the perspective we're going to give Europe over the 20 or 30 years? That's why I'm not frustrated. I'm impatient. And I think today, as a French and German, our work is to give a new dynamic to this European adventure. Once again, the United States has been repeating critiques and lies about China. It has been a common scenario. It's the same thing everywhere. The only thing I can say is that those accusations against China are lies. They're not based on facts. The root of all this is that the United States doesn't want to see the rapid recovery of China, and they don't want to accept the success of a socialist country. This is not fair. China has the right to develop. The people of China have the right to live a better life. The most important task for the United States and China is to sit down and hold a serious meeting to find a way in two great countries with different social systems can live in harmony and interact in peace. I believe President Trump, unfortunately, doesn't have good advisors. He has been expecting that the Iranian country fall down ever since he left the nuclear agreement. And he thought that the maximum power would put us to our knees in 2 months. The United States can go back to the negotiation table, but unfortunately, Macron's and Shinzo Abe's suggestions have not been taken in, because President Trump is sure that we are about to collapse, and they don't want to talk with a government that's about to collapse. And not only did the representative of governments go to this conference, but also we see that Wang Qi, who's the representative of China, also Sergey Lavrov and Mark Zuckerberg. He's the maximum representative of the huge company Facebook that practically has a monopoly of social networks. In terms of security, we have more challenges because all of the threats are right around the corner. We're becoming more sophisticated. We have more alliances. We are sure of where we're now. In the last year, we've seen the evolution of the threats in many different ways. One of the things that we have researched is the interference, every time larger, in the electoral system, done on electoral systems, on information. It's an interference that is more domestic. Zuckerberg, they're at the same height of representatives of government. Let's check our digital websites. For example, Hispan TV has an article of January 5th. This was a very sad day for history. But at that day, Chomsky said that the United States threats the world peace, and we have to avoid the war against Iran. The United States thinks that Iran is the biggest threat, but Noam Chomsky says that it's easy to invent pretext for an attack. However, he thought it's important to avoid any type of war with Iran. In this sense, he criticized some statements on U.S. politicians saying that all options were on the table to attack Iran. Meanwhile, it's the United States who's violating the UN Charter and international law. According to this researcher, the United States is trying to control the Middle East due to their huge amounts of oil reserves. What it is doing is the same tactic it is used ever the Second World War. Let's not forget that United States withdrew from the nuclear agreement that was made up of 5 countries. He also emphasized that this pact is not dead with the withdrawal of Washington because it's not a bilateral agreement, but also it goes along with other big nations. The other parts of the agreement are still committed to this agreement, and he understands that this will direct the United States to a larger isolation in the global context. What does another headline says? United States tells its allies that the Huawei 5G is a threat to NATO. United States has pushed their war towards this private company. This is against China, basically, and it does to ask the help of their allies not to accept the 5G technology because they say that this will spy on them. Mark Kasper, who's the Secretary of Security, has asked the European Union that the 5G of Huawei is a threat for NATO. So the United States is pressuring many countries so they will not use the 5G. This is the infrastructure for the development of 5G telephones, and they ask to find new alternatives. Trump's pressure has not gone well with the United Kingdom. Last year, the government of Boris Johnson authorized Huawei to participate in a limited way in spreading the 5G. This did not go well with Trump. In this article, there's a part that says United States is looking for alternatives, and it says Huawei has rejected the allegations of espionage. Now, the United States goes a step further, asking its allies to find alternatives different from Huawei. Washington has said that they are already working with organizations and companies that can develop 5G. Robert Blair, who's the Secretary of Telecommunication, has said that the U.S. is working with Nokia and Ericsson, as well as with the Korean Samsung and other small companies. I want to take advantage of reading this article that's called "The Battle of 5G is Increasing." It has been written by Manuel Blanco, and published on the 16th of this month. And it said in some of the paragraphs, the conclusion is ineditable. It says that the major threat for the 5G will not come by the hackers, nor by criminal organizations. The biggest threat will come from a country or an actor supported by another nation, a government, this is. The report that has just been issued does not speak of China or Huawei, but nobody doubts it that this is talking about the huge country of the East. At the end of the day, all of the information will through 5G. This is information of millions of people, information of security, managing pivotal sectors like water, electricity, all type of companies that have robots. Everything will interconnected and therefore will be vulnerable. The war of 5G has not done anything else than begin. The West is looking with some doubt about how this is going to work out. The United States has been very belligerent in this war because they associate Huawei with the government of Peking. So there has been attacks against this company, and this could go 180 times around. According to a specialist, there are American organizations, ITT, Apple, to find a new standard for the open networks of 5G. So this is control or is it business? So if they're able to go through with it, the dependency of the Huawei could have a hegemonic control, both the commercial and the geostrategic aspect. These are the preliminary aspects. And they say that the 5G industry will move $280 billion before 2025. This is a huge business, but probably less important than having all of the control of data that will circulate through the future networks. Before this conference, the organizer published a report on security of Munich that set the standards where how the conversations had to take place. This report of this year was titled De-Westernization, and it speaks about how the West has lost its hegemony and with new threats and challenges that need an answer. So how could a Western aspect go well? This is one of the main questions that appear in the report. This report of 2020 of Munich speaks of the lack of West, just like a sentiment of uncertainty. Many challenges of security go hand in hand of what the analysts think as the decadence of the Western project. This text says that these Western companies have lost the common understanding of what it means to be part of the West. However, it might be the biggest challenge. It is still unknown if the United States will be able to propose a new option. The absence of the West not only reflects on their position. For years, China has invested in parallel organizations that complement and they challenge other organizations that are ruled by the West. Now there are emerging business that are the ones that are setting the agenda. The report of Security 2020 gives a general aspect of the main challenges of the policy of security and shows data and information on specific topics and places. It also speaks of how Russia, China, United States how are handling their security topics. At the same time, it offers information about the insecurity in space, as well as what's going on with artificial intelligence and the extreme left that is gaining up. There we had a very awful stop. Well, let's see what Lisandra Andres, she's our correspondent in Moscow. Lisandra. Yes, thank you very much for everybody who are listening us. Ever since the beginning of the summit, it was marked by the tensions between Europe and the United States because both blocs have differences about the state of health of their transatlantic relationship. Experts say that the West has lost their influence, and it's about time to think how the world will be, where this collective role will be reduced even more. Even compared with the reduction that is going on now. However, Secretary of State of the U.S. has said that the West is winning territory in Europe. Washington took advantage of their presence there to keep on pressuring their allies in Europe to close the door of their 5G. And Germany said that they would not do it. The members of the European Union are assessing everything in two ways. On one hand, the solidarity of Europe and Asia, and on the other hand, financial viability. So they have also, it's Germany has rejected to close any way in of China, and they are not going to have any taxes on Huawei. On the contrary, they will have taxes. The U.S. companies will have to pay taxes to the European Union. This is why nobody was so surprised of having Mark Zuckerberg in the meeting. Principalmente qué hacía Facebook para luchar contra la manipulación a través de esta red social, teniendo en cuenta el precedente del año pasado. And this based on what we thought of last year during the European Parliament. During the summit in Munich, there was also supervision of the international commitments to try to reach an agreement and to have a ceasefire in Libya. In a press conference afterwards of high-ranking officials and diplomats, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Germany, Keiko Maas, have reaffirmed the principles of the Berlin Conference. Likewise, the Foreign Affairs Minister of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, have said that they are maintaining contacts with Turkey to find a solution to everything that's going on in Libya. Now back to studios. Thank you, Lisandra. Now it's time to show you our critical play. And please write to us, participate with us. This is what we're trying to spread. Will United States and Europe do away with their own, doing away with the security conference to victimize themselves in front of Russia and China? Give us your criteria. Let's go to a pause and we'll be right back. What are the conflicts that the 400 participants spoke about on the security conference held in Munich? Let's see it. The report of the 56th edition of the Security Conference in Munich points at the main international conflicts that must be followed up. Among those, Afghanistan, Libya, Burkina Faso, Ukraine, United States, Iran, Israel, the Persian Gulf, and Venezuela. According to them, Venezuela is the only one in Latin America, while many other countries are having more problems. It is enough to say the crisis of migration in Mexico and Salvador and Guatemala, and the armed conflict in Colombia, which far from having peace, according to the agreement in 2016, have only increased. It is also important to speak about the deforestation in the Amazon. This was overseen in the conference of the World Security. It's also important to speak about the security in China and Russia, and putting in force the 5G was very much questioned by the Washington delegation by considering it a risk to the international security. There are reports that say that an American official has revealed the possibility of an agreement between their country and Afghanistan that could end up in withdrawing from the U.S. forces from the Middle East. In the context of this conference, there was a proposition to promote a peace process in Libya following the initiative of Berlin to avoid a civil war. First part of analysis in our critical moves, we are talking with, from France, Roberto Melo. He's also an expert in international policy. And Francisco Conoanes, he's another guest today. I want to greet you both to our critical move. Roberto, I would like to greet you. What is your vision of this Europe that is already accepting that that the West is not the main actor of the international policy? Good afternoon. Let's go by parts. The non-Westernization of the world is nothing. Is nonsense, because the West is no longer a reference for humanity. After 1918, and this was even worse after World War II and the loss of the French and the British Empire, and after the year 45. This is to speak about the non-Western is nonsense, because after the process that United States has that used to produce 8 of every 10 car that was used in the world, and now it's only half a car of every 10 cars. So let's see what happens in the Munich conference. This is just a publicity stunt, and the United States are getting closer to publicity. That's all they're doing. And what they're doing is to center the analysis of the European defense and the possibilities of the economic possibilities that Brussels offers. And this does not allow for European defense. And nobody wants to put their money. Nobody wants to dig into their pockets. Nowadays, according to the European Union, cannot pass more than 1.2% of the deficit to 5% of the GDP, while the United States is spending between 5 and 10. To close a little bit with this topic, We also have to see that Trump, in the last meetings, has not really cared about the European fate. And they've told him, listen, you have to pay NATO. For Macron, NATO is practically dead, and they don't know what to do either. So to answer your question that you just posed, the de-Westernization goes through taking away the control of the banks. With the policies of the banks in Europe, we're in agony, in economic agony, and Europe continues trying to recycle its economy. When they confront with countries like China and with Russia, then they're trying to sell Coca-Cola or anything, not to talk about the main thing, which is the setback of Europe in an economic topic. Stay with us, and we want to go to our other guest. Hello, Francisco. How do you think that this Security Council, why do you think that corporations are assisting to this conference and they have the status of a government? Well, they are governments. Through their hands, 80% of the money liquidity goes through. It's 80%. So you can just imagine how powerful they are. 80% of their liquidity is circulating. Belongs to the 10. Well, let's say 20 of the global corporation. So, Francisco, between Facebook and his representative, Mike Zuckerberg, and the security topics, what is the link there? Allow me to finish my previous idea. So let's not forget that the U.S. has a war against Huawei. And the presence of Zuckerberg is surprising. But it's obvious because he's the epitome, the center of the social network and the technology of communication. So he is there present because of the power he has. And of course, Facebook and what Facebook represents in general. Going back to the central point of the topic you want to speak of, why does Europe why are they speaking of the de-Westernization? It's nonsense, because at the end of the day, Europe is worried of something that's not so interesting. Europe is worried, shares with Asia and Russia the same land. So Europe has an existential problem. And now they're seeing how there is a Chinese invasion in Europe. So part of this topic is the coronavirus, and that they are being also infected. And let's not forget that the fear they have of China it's because of the fear they have of the success China has had. At the same time, these Chinese this Chinese success is doing away with the U.S. companies. And now what we see is that the state is a liberal invention. It goes way back. The state is an invention of the liberalism. And at this point, it's being sacrificed by the transnational companies. So this would be, in a way, a conclusion to talk about your question of transnationals. They have grown, and at the end, they did away with it. And when we see the conditions of this, of the cooperation, we see that this de-Westernization is a threat to the white ship on behalf of other races. Francisco, let's go back to Roberto. Is 5G at the center of this fight? Well, here there's a problem. The other person on the panel says that the 5G is at the heart of the storm because it's not handled by the U.S. nor Europe. And who is handling this? China. And this makes me recall a little bit about this, the problem with the canyon. The Chinese invented it, but they didn't know how to use it. Here they do know how to use it. In this Western world. And they want to de-Westernize, but at the same time they want to sell on a type of makeup. The war at the end is because the United States and Europe are not in conditions to compete with the influence of China in terms of the information they will be able to have worldwide. And this has nothing to do with an economic policy, but also a political policy. And there's a great debate behind the wall of the news organizations, not only who controls, but also what is the way of control, and who is profiting from this. Cristina Kirchner was speaking about this, that the debate is not going beyond that. If it's Marxism, communism, just like we know it, or it's the capitalism just like we've known in the Keynes way. So now we see there's a confrontation that China is gearing up for, or on the other hand, there is a total disaster on behalf of the economic standpoint, political, and of course technological. So these are the two elements at conflict. Zuckerberg has to be in the conference because it's like Christopher Columbus was in the conference to see what we're going to do with the colonialism. And at the end, others took control, but that's part of history. And the problem is, it's not only a racial problem. I think it is a cultural problem. It's who is going to direct all of the weight in the second part of the 21st century. So we see how China is acting more Western than ever. This defense of non-aggression and the non-interference of the United States in Europe is false because the United States is already on the side of the Turkish. he's putting his workers around Libya, and we have Fayed al-Sarraj, who's a man of the U.S., while the opposition to the U.S. is trying to push forward General Khalifa Fatah, which this is just having the war on the other side. When the non-economic policy of Europe has already helped, like Portugal with the control of the Atlantic, where Germany itself, while the point is to support the independence of NATO, but they have to give in to this evidence of the agreement with the Russians. I think we cannot speak about defense without buying cannons. I'm gonna hang on to the last phrase of yours. Thank you very much for your participation. I want to thank both of my guests. Let's go to a map of the Security Summit. Who participated? What does it play? Security Conference of Munich, a multilateral dialogue. This was held, it is held yearly in Munich to speak about security policies. The conference began in 1963 by Eva Heinrich von Kleist-Schmeitzen, and it only had 60 participants. The initial objective is to avoid conflicts, and this is why they gathered experts and leaders. This has been the most important independent forum that gathers 400 high-level people from 70 countries. They also include international organizations, high representatives of military organisms, and scientists. They analyze the present and the future in the line of having security. One of the discussions is the exchange about the transatlantic relationships. Among their principles is to contribute to the Pacific solution of conflicts through a dialogue within the international community of security. Since this meeting is not binding, like opposed to other organizations, they don't issue a statement, a final statement. Wolfgang Ischinger, the ambassador of Germany, is the one who leads always this conference. The consulting council is made up by 22 countries. They have support of Bayer, Microsoft, Johnson & Johnson, Airbus, BMW, and others. They are not supposed to have more than 8% in participation of these companies, so they will maintain their independence. So those are the sponsors and who decide. Let's recall our critical question. Will United States and Europe do away with what they want by recycling the Munich Security Conference? Their discourse of threats of security, of world security, to get victimized in front of China and Russia. Please participate with us. We'll be right back. The Western powers are going to this new edition of the Security Council. Let's see what are the answers of everything the U.S. said on behalf of Russia and China. One of the main topics on the Conference of Security of Munich was the alleged threat of the Western powers see in Russia and China. Washington speaks of the threat that Moscow implies to define how to tackle with Syria, and they have centered in the military aspect. In answer to this, Sergei Lavrov has called upon the U.S. and NATO to stop the expenditure on a threat that doesn't exist, and it has asked from European Union to be independent, and they also call on the U.S. to help on the solution for the Libya and Syria. Lavrov has also rejected the alleged allegations of the U.S. that they're trying to gain power. We are in a multipolar world on the technological, political, and military standpoint. It's normal that every power that emerges tries to find their own space of influence, but we're only trying to counteract the Chinese and the Russian power. This was the answer to Donald Trump. The Secretary of Defense, Mike Spare, said that China is stealing U.S. secrets and intimidates their smaller neighbors, and they have no boundaries on what they do. And so the main threat for the United States is China and Russia. This was very much questioned by the Chinese delegate, saying that at the heart of all this is that they don't want to see the rapid growth of President Kim, and they don't want to accept the power of a socialist country. The Huawei growth, as is said by the U.S., that it's a threat. At this moment, I'm going to present Alejandro Vergara. He's an expert in international security. This is the first time that Alejandro's on TV. How are you, Alejandro? Very well. Thank you. As you can see, we have alleged threats to international security. How do you see this? Well, there are some declarations that are ironic, like the case of Venezuela, that is said by the West. So they just make it evident. And they don't care about the migratory problems that we have in Central America. So why are these topics like a threat to the United States? Well, in the case of Colombia, Colombia is the U.S. ally. They're even part of NATO. And of course, they're submissive to their ideological policy. And the only threat of Venezuela is that we just don't want to succumb to their policies. Well, we also can see this problem as an aspect of a fourth generation problem. Well, of course, there's a representative of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, and if we see that in this war of fourth generation, there are people with more influence. We can see that there's espionage of information. And of course, what they do is they take over the information of the world, and they sell it to big corporations. And of course, you see that Facebook has taken over. So, and let's not forget that everything belongs to Facebook nowadays. And we see how the recent campaign of Bolsonaro in Brazil Even do the even in the coup d'état of Bolivia, yes, so we see how these actors, this multinational company, respect is a fourth generation company, and they manipulate the way people think, and they can manipulate how people vote. For example, the case of Venezuela. They are putting in the conscience of the young people, and they tell them how to think. It would be terrible to think that the new Secretary of Defense of the United States would be Mike Zuckerberg. If we also see this with the 5G, of course it's a threat. And of course they're attacking the Huawei company because when they just recently said it was revealed that the US is also trying to do espionage. And what happens with Russia? Why is also Russia a problem? Well, in this case, Russia is developing a gas pipeline that is going to supply part of the European continent. This would limit the fact that the United States can sell energy to part of Europe. Energy is translated to power. So now if United States is not able to provide energy, then they're losing their power. Do you consider the United States as losing their power? Well, yes. It was said in 1924, the West is in decadence. And in an arrogant way, they're trying to do anything with the assassination of Suleiman. And they do represent a threat. And for the United States, thank you very much, Alejandro, for your time. Let's go to conclusions. At the same time that they recognize the world of de-Westernization, the United States does accept the loss of their power. And they also reinforce the idea of a threat. Apparently, China and Russia are technological threats. But what you can see is that they're victims, and they're trying to recognize the existence of a plural world where the growth of Russia and China is non-stoppable. And the best of all, it's a development that the new powers put at the service of everybody without a colonialist pursuit. And this sends overboard what the U.S. is saying. For now, this is all we're going to be analyzing. See you tomorrow.